All right, so we are back here at our home base, a little studio shed. Last few episodes of both podcasts, we've actually been out at the Grand National Roadster Show, Grand National Truck Show before that. So thanks to those guys for allowing us to set up there, get people that are coming in from out of town, and knock a bunch of these out.
Yeah, it's great to see everybody like that too, and be able to have that opportunity to grab some of those guys and sit them down and say, hey,
well, and that's
tell me your
like
story.
Even the last one, with the Copinger brothers, they were obviously there. We hadn't really planned on that,
Right.
but we've been very truck heavy on the last multiple episodes, which is our bread and butter. This time we're going to be diving into, for the next at least 4 to 5 episodes, the history of the wheel, the what creates the rolling art, the rolling art for all these custom cars and trucks.
Exactly. And like you said too, from pretty much the beginning of time, since the wheel was invented, people have been modifying, changing, or even decorating different types of wheels.
There's over the years, from the wagons, era to the back in the chariot days,
Right.
That the decorating or even the pinstriping on the spokes of the wheels.
Right.
I mean, even the term spokes comes not from, wire wheels and Daytons and lowriders,
Right.
but from the wooden spoked wheels.
Well, even the term hubcap comes from wagons.
Yeah.
Because it was actually a cap that kept the...
Well, and you had a very large hub on a wagon.
And usually you had very sticky grease. So what they would do is they would cover up that grease so you wouldn't get dirt in it, obviously, destroying.
Yeah, the dirt trails and
Right.
clogging it up.
So yeah, the hubcap was actually not a car thing; it was a wagon thing.
Yeah.
So
And that's the thing. A lot of the stuff in cars all transfer over from,
absolutely
those wagon. It's the same principles, just now there's an engine instead of a horse, more
Right.
horsepower instead of 8 horsepower.
Right.
The wheel, we could go back to 3000 BC,
Right.
The invention of the wheel. If someone figured out that you could roll it, if it was circular instead of a square
Right.
or a, big rock.
Yeah.
That's obviously a whole nother podcast, whole nother person to be involved with that and some, archaeology. But I
Might
think
be a little bit sleepy too.
well, I mean, depends on what you're into, but I think we're going to start with obviously the birth of the automobile, maybe even a little bit before that, just because some of those things do carry over. And then with this episode, we're going to dive into kind of all the original stuff that the hot rod guys were doing pre-war, and then maybe a little bit into post-World War II when actually, mag wheels and casting of these wheels and race wheels actually kind of started to come into play.
Well, you're exactly right too. And two things that are actually going to help us tell the story is there was 2 world wars during this time. So if you look at the technology that was being applied for military applications, a lot of those applications ended up being automotive applications.
Well, I mean, one of the most famous wheels is the artillery style wheel.
Exactly.
Take a guess.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. And sure enough, that was a super popular wheel from, military applications that spilled over into, like you mentioned, it went from wagons to automobiles. Well, the technology was already there with artilleries.
Because you had even wooden artillery style
Yes.
wheels, then steel, all that stuff.
Right. And the majority at the time of the birth of the automotive, the birth of the automotive
Industry, or
industry.
what are you going for?
Well,
I'll say, which you going for?
I'm still waking up, guys. But no, seriously, the war effort, obviously, they were producing those types of wheels, but they needed more high quality, more heavy duty looking wheels.
Well, and that's, you got to look at too, what were the roads and what were the cars or the wagons back then that
Right.
were going, unless you were on a chase with robbing a train or something, you were only going 10 miles an hour or something, and cruising over some potholes in, Main Street.
Well, and look at the early cars. The early cars had the wood spoke,
Very tall
tire.
Yeah.
Right. Very small tire. But their top speeds were 20, 25 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And then you look at also too, all the old photos and the old movie stuff. You see these cars driving through ruts, big, steep,
Well, and the larger wheels helped with that.
Right.
Yeah.
But as cars got faster and as roads got better, obviously those wood spoke wheels were not the way to go.
No, I mean, you'd get the death wall probably at, 30 miles an hour.
Can you imagine just the, hitting the thing, hitting hard corner and it pushing, just folding the wheel,
Yeah, drifting some 50-inch spokes or something
Right.
like that.
Yeah, but I mean that's the whole thing. They needed something stronger, And obviously at the time, you were looking at bicycles, we're looking at other wagons, we're looking at, different ways of moving things. So spoke wheels and also even solid spoke wheels, like solid spoke wheels for large trucks, your Mack trucks, stuff like that. They were using more of a wagon design.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't a far stretch, but it made a lot more sense to go metal over wood.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing too, like you said, Industrial Revolution, that's obviously bringing metal more, and production, rolling steel, stamping steel, being able to
the technology was
produce
there.
these versus just one guy, carving out some wood pieces and inserting them into a hoop that's bent over a jig and stuff
Right.
like that. So
Right.
but there was a lot of people at that time that pre-automobile that were doing pinstriping
Oh, absolutely.
on some of these wheels, or like painting these wheels, so the customizing of wheels was there since the very beginning.
Well, and I think that an example of that would be more, let's say, middle 20th century would be like the circus wagons that you would see, like that would go from different towns or come off of trains.
You mean middle of like 19th century?
Well, no, from there, but even
it did carry on.
Into
That's
the 20th
true.
century,
That's
right?
true.
I mean, you'd have
Yeah,
them, they'd
good point.
load them on trains and then offload them on trains. Usually parade them through the town, like, hey, the circus isn't down.
Yeah.
But that's the whole thing. They wanted a bright,
Yeah, you
brilliant
getting
looking,
attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, they had some of the nicest wagons around. Also, too, beer manufacturers. That was their way of advertising what they had. So you'd have like a beer cart, which is really a beer wagon, but beer carts would go through town and they would advertise, like you'd have, Budweiser, Stroh's, those kind of guys that would, Old Milwaukee, that kind of, all those cool names. But of course they would letter and pinstripe that stuff on the side of the wagons, and they would decorate everything. I mean, when we think of lowriders right now, like where they touch every single part of it.
Yeah.
These wagons were the same.
Well, they did engraving as well.
Yes.
They did, painting. They did
plating,
patterns,
different things,
gold
different,
leafing,
right?
All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So they call that like it was the Gilded Era.
Well,
anyways,
and that's,
but
I mean,
that's
yeah,
what
you
they
look
were
at even the
gilding
fire
that.
trucks
Right.
that had the similar thing, and that wasn't necessarily because they needed it. It
Right.
was because, hey, you want to parade around town and look good and,
Right.
do all that. So what would we, if we had to dial into like maybe the first mass-produced wheel,
Right.
what would that kind of entail? Because that would probably be a wire spoke design.
Correct.
Because we still, this is pre-World War I. The manufacturing, the Model T was probably just coming out.
Correct.
And you didn't have maybe the technology yet to do full stamped, one piece or two piece steel wheels and stuff like that.
When we think of a car manufacturer now, we think of like a huge place that has, different plants and different facilities that do different things for
Yeah,
them.
you're talking millions of square feet,
Right.
And hundreds of thousands of employees all over the world.
Right. But back then, they were small companies, but there were thousands of them. It wasn't just the big three. There was, literally thousands of companies making cars. So what happened is most of those people, they would rely on suppliers. Like you'd have an engine supplier, you'd have a coach builder, like you mentioned.
That built the body
That
of
built the body,
of it,
right?
yeah.
But
Same with they do with the wagons now. They're doing it for cars.
Right, exactly. So different companies popped up at that time to manufacture wood and also steel wheels. Obviously, it was also very popular to have a large chrome-looking, spoke wheel. That was like if you had a lot of money. That was the Auburns, the Cords, the Duesenbergs, all of the high-name Packard, for example.
Yeah.
Packard, who had the patent on the actual wire wheel during this time.
Oh, really?
So again, too, like from a car manufacturer standpoint, the aftermarket had to address the wire wheel deal. So you look at like 1909 is kind of a benchmark year for wire wheels because two companies actually come into play.
This is 10 years basically after the invention of the car itself.
Much, right. So you look at one company, you look at Kelsey, which was owned by a guy named John Kelsey, and he manufactured wire wheels. But at the same time, too, you had also Hayes, which was another company that they also came out in 1909. Now, the funny thing about these guys is Kelsey got the contract for Ford, Hayes got the contract for GM. Right, so those guys are already making like the majority of, let's say, wheels for that time. But what happened is that the competition was good, but also wasn't great. So they tried to join forces later in the 20s. But beforehand, there's a little company that I'm sure most people listening to this podcast have heard of before. There was a company called Dayton Wire Wheels.
Yeah, I think I've heard of them.
Yeah, and they came out in, I want to say 2000.
2000.
Listen to me.
No, but it was
like 1916 or something like that.
Yeah, it was right when
Right.
World War I
Yeah.
was coming about.
Right.
And
And that's funny that you bring that up too, because Kelsey-Hayes wasn't a thing yet.
Yeah, that was after. That was later in the 20s that they merged.
But Kelsey themselves, they made the majority of their money also on World War I artillery and different military applications. Right,
rolling all the tanks and cannons and guns around. And
right.
Obviously, starting the not aerospace industry, but the
military,
the aircraft industry was kind of just getting started.
Even before that, and you're right, it was just getting started, getting off the ground, and we'll revisit that because that has the aircraft, and that has a lot to do with each other.
With hot rods, with cars,
right.
It's kind of one and the same almost.
But they were a huge part of the war effort, and they produced, like I mentioned, wheels for artillery cannons and tank treads and different various spoked items that they put together. And also, too, they started to get into other stuff later on a little bit, but they got into more military applications that include brakes. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Dayton also was from where else? Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the birthplace of aviation.
So depends on which license plate you ask.
Exactly.
it's where are the Wright brothers from?
Right.
Or where did they actually fly the plane?
Yeah,
What state did they do that
But there was more... there's more aircraft,
that's Rust Belt. That's huge manufacturing, steelwork. Like metallurgy, like all that stuff.
Right
there.
Right, and also too, another thing that also comes into play as far as rims and wheels go is that there was also, you got to remember that you can't build a rim that doesn't have a tire. So Ohio again being kind of the hub as tires, Goodyear.
Oh yeah.
So you got to remember that those Dayton was put in the right place.
Yeah.
Because they knew that they had automotive business with Ford. They knew that they had aircraft business with everybody that was building airplanes in that area. And also, too, you had
tires. Yeah.
So that was kind of like...
Well, and that's what's interesting, too, with that point is even later on we'll address this, is that it got to a point where then, wheel companies could make whatever sizes almost that they wanted to.
Right.
But they were limited on what tires could fit on it that would then go onto an actual vehicle that made sense with that. So I remember that kind of happening with, 20s and all of that stuff.
It still happens today, right.
And that's to say, so it's still been a common thing that they kind of have to work hand in hand together a little bit. So maybe we'll address, the tire industry either as part of this or, its own separate episode. But I mean, Dayton's, we know now as, or we look at them now as like quintessential lowrider, maybe some custom hot rodding stuff, but pretty much just straight, like that's a lowrider wheel.
Well, here's a really kind of fun fact. So Dayton is the first aftermarket wheel because Ford offered them as the upgrade wheel. Obviously your Model Ts came with, like we mentioned, wooden spokes, or what they had solid metal covers that they would put two pieces together around a hoop. And it was a solid rim. So think of like two hubcaps basically put together with a solid hoop around it.
Kind of like, like moon discs or something, but
very similar.
Melded together.
Right. But they were wobbly. They didn't balance very well. You couldn't really true them. Whereas a wire wheel, you could true the thing completely straight, just like a bicycle tire or a motorcycle tire. Right. So you get better performance out of the wire wheel. And also, too, you'd have more strength. Because obviously you could make the wheel fatter, you can make it thicker, you can make the spokes thicker.
Yeah, I was going to say you can do a lot more than you can with maybe some wood, and obviously it's going to last a little bit longer.
Right. So if we get after World War I, we start to get into the mass production, like you mentioned. The Model T was around, but the Model A is just coming out. More passenger cars are coming out. People want that movie car look too. They want that wire wheel. They can't afford a Duesenberg, but they can still make their Ford look like a nice car. So it was very popular.
Hey, that's what the aftermarket's about.
That's what I'm saying, right?
Is doing those upgrades on a lower model vehicle to make it look, or perform better than it is.
Absolutely. So that was very popular. And in the 20s, I mentioned again where you had Kelsey, and then you also had, of course, Hayes.
Yeah. And then it became Kelsey-Hayes.
So they merged together in 1927. And they did that for size. They didn't do it because they thought that it would be a good idea. They did it because they wanted to survive. So Packard at the time, as I mentioned before, had the patent on the actual wire wheel. So there was a court battle going on between the three companies.
I would say between Dayton as well on all of that, yeah.
And what happened was John Kelsey actually passed away in 27. And the person that bought his place, boy, I think his name is Kennedy.
Yeah, George Kennedy.
George Kennedy.
That's to say, I got Marcel's notes
Yeah.
on here. So he's going by memory. I'm going by notes.
Right. But George Kennedy, he actually purchased the company, and they settled out of court with Packard for $500,000.
In 1927 money.
Yes.
Yeah, so all you lowrider guys with your wire wheels, you can thank the fact that they decided to
That's 100%. Because, I mean, look.
Yeah. I don't know how much that would be in today's money, but that would be millions of dollars.
Right. But they needed to do that because they were supplying the other 90% of the industry anyways. So to them, that would have been a death.
So if you've been following us on Auto Revolution and checked out some of our OBS Clash build series or even the documentary we did a few years ago, you know we do a lot of stuff with Beltec suspension. What's really cool is they partner with us to give you guys free shipping on every order that you use the code AutoRevolution at beltec.com. Once again, you can get free shipping on everything from OBS lowering kits to Jeep and brand new lift kits. Sway bars, shocks, you name it, you can get it at beltec.com. Use the code AutoRevolution at beltec.com to get free shipping. Now back to the show. We talked about the Ford Model T and having those upgrade options for the wire wheels. Well, they finally did start to do welded and stamped and rolled steel disc wheels like you mentioned, but that was still in the mid-20s. That was just around this kind of time period as well. So newer technology was starting to come into play, and that they could actually make these full steel wheels, but the wire wheels were still the bread and butter.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for not just a manufacturing standpoint, again, a tire deal, it was difficult to get tires for some of those larger steel wheels, plus a giant, at the time their mentality was very large wheel on a very thin, narrow tread pattern. And they didn't think of, oh, well, if we make the wheel smaller, we can make it wider and it would drive better. They weren't there yet. So again, too, it was a little bit of, we like the wire wheels, and this is the technology that we have, and these are the tires that we have.
This is what we can make work together.
Right. And we didn't have the, again, we're talking about early Fords with fenders and small, cowls and small bodies. We didn't have the full fendered cars yet. We didn't have it where it really kind of hung over the wheels and tires.
With those, then you needed, those started coming in the late 20s or mid 20s. You needed something with a little more width and strength, because those were, thousands of pounds heavier than a little Model T for sure.
Yes, exactly. You mentioned, as the cars got bigger, and also even as trucks got bigger, as delivery trucks got bigger, the weight rating actually went up. So we had to get into something like that. So, but at that time, going into the 30s now, we had more manufacturers that were obviously making more cars. So we had to get more stuff, like we had to go to more of a larger hub design because the brakes got larger as well. And even too, some cars never even had brakes. Remember that some of those, well, I shouldn't say didn't have brakes, but they had manual
I was
brakes.
going to say like a manual handbrake or something.
A cable brake, not hydraulic brakes.
Yeah.
So that also too came into play.
Basically, it's like the same as a bicycle.
It's a bicycle, right.
Cable grip.
So that was the next thing, is that they looked at, okay, well, the cars are getting faster. The cars are getting heavier. The cars have brakes now. They have good brakes or better brakes. So where do we go fast? Right? Hot rodders, of course, at the day, they noticed that, and they noticed that there was different ways that they could gear the car as well. So if you look at, like, let's say a 35 Ford wheel is a 15-inch diameter wheel. But if you wanted to change the gearing in your hot rod at that time, there wasn't a lot of gear choices put together. So to change the gearing to go faster racing, most of these guys would switch to a larger or taller tire.
Yeah, change the ratio, basically.
So that, the diameter size will obviously change the gear ratio, and you could go basically faster on the bigger end of speed. It took a while to get there, but once you got there, actually the centrifugal force and the size of the diameter carried the car faster. So that was another kind of like little racing trick that they had going on. And that's what made, again, too, a 35 Ford wheel super popular. Again, those were made by, Kelsey-Hayes.
God,
I'm going to do this every time, aren't I?
Well, and that's, you mentioned that, because now, like I said, we've jumped into the 30s now. In 1934 was actually the invention of the drop center steel wheel, where you could change the offsetting. You could change, the setup of this wheel.
Right.
So then, you said introduced in 1935 on the Ford cars. This was kind of a perfect little storm to be able to modify and hot rod out a Model T or a Model A that was, from something earlier with a brand new wheel.
Right. Yeah, exactly. and that was widely popular even into before the war. I mean, we looked at, even 40 Fords are another wheel that's very popular.
Well, and that's when the 5-on-5.5 lug
go.
pattern was standardized by Ford, at least at that time. And that kind of created at least a standard for, wheels to be able to swap around and change out and upgrade.
And we got to remember too, that I know we're mentioning Ford and GM, but there's still Plymouth, there's still Buick, there's still Pontiac that are individuals still.
Yeah, not
right?
under the same flag.
Yeah. So those guys were doing
also
that.
European, companies too.
Well,
European car companies, sports car companies that are, coming around at this time as well.
Exactly. And one of I think, the first one that really comes to mind is Borrani's, who are an Italian wheel that was actually why they were so widely popular was they were made out of aluminum instead of being made out of steel. So, of course, they were half the weight. And also they had a larger hub center that allowed for it to be a stronger wheel, but also to more of a different configuration. Like you mentioned that you can change the way that the wheel looked. Borrani's, you could do that. You could have them laced to different offsets, different sizes.
Yeah.
So,
and that's also, with the spokes, the wire spokes, we forgot about the different design kind of patterns on how they were weaved together to get a different look or style or like you said, the offset.
Yeah.
So they could be infinitely customizable.
Think 100-spoke Daytons now, right? Like where they're not your typical 70-spoke wheels. They look completely different, but they're still a spoke wheel. And that's kind of like you mentioned, like a Borrani compared to, a Dayton at the time. They look completely different. And I know everyone's seen these wheels because if you've seen a Ferrari or a Jaguar or an Aston Martin from any of the, let's say, eras from 1920 to 1960, they had Borranis on them.
Yeah.
And the company itself, it was founded in the early 20s.
And that's you said it was originally a partnership with an English company.
Right.
But then, in the 30s, it just came to Borrani.
I'm saying it wrong, right? Right.
We knew that was going to happen.
Right.
They just dropped that name for,
wasn't there
keeping it Italian.
Wasn't there some political
that's
deal about
this
that?
time of Mussolini and all
Right.
that stuff and pre-World War II. So they're, very Italian nationalist, all that
Right,
stuff.
right.
But
because the Englishman, he had the hub. That was his.
That was that design, and
that
they
was
were
his
the
design.
spoke kind of, and that was the partnership.
And the partnership came about because obviously, he was the better craftsman of the wheels.
Well, and those wheels, obviously we're talking about the Ferraris, the Jaguars, but those even started to peel over a little bit into the American hot rodding culture a little at the time, but like way later on.
Yes.
Because it had that sports car knockoff.
Exactly.
Center kind of style wheel versus a lug pattern. So for racing, for hot rodding, like that was much more desirable.
Absolutely. I mean, we look at now the F1 pit stops where they're 1.2 seconds. Well, even back in the day, they were thinking of things like that. Mm-hmm. Like if I can get tires changed fast, I can get back onto the track or back on to the course.
Well, and that's, maybe, we should explain a little bit of what like the knockoff, the concept behind it.
So let's start with them because they actually had Borrani. Sorry.
Borrani.
Sorry.
Or maybe it's Borrani.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So they had the patent that they had on that. They had a spline that went into the knockoff. So it actually located on the hub of the wheel. You could slide it on those splines and then hit it with a traditional knockoff. But that's why those wheels were so sought after, because that spline design wouldn't allow the wheel to come loose and throw the, basically
it
wheel
wouldn't.
off.
You would be locked on there. It would be solidly.
And that was a patent that they had, for many, many years, and to this day, I think they still carry that. But that's one thing that made those wheels stand out. They were lightweight and they were safe. So of course, American hot rodders looked at that as, wait, I can reduce the weight that I have and gain more momentum by having a lighter wheel, and it's not going to fall off. Where do I get these wheels?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay. Well, it's also no secret that we all know, as we mentioned before, that wheels were aircraft and automotive. And going back to Dayton, again, Dayton was kind of a well-known name. They were on Fords, but I think the biggest thing for them in the actual late 20s was Charles Lindbergh's flight from across the Atlantic in the Spirit of St. Louis, because It had D's on it.
Yeah, so he was rolling on some Daytons.
Yep.
Back in the day.
And that was a big push for him, though. That was, I mean, for the Dayton company to be on, at that time, that was like the biggest thing that ever happened.
Even though you probably, wheels are obviously, that's, landing gear.
Right.
Basically for a plane, you're not driving across the Atlantic.
Right.
But they could probably put a claim to fame out that like, hey, yeah, our wheels went, from New York to London. And,
right.
In one trip and all that stuff. And
but those guys, everybody did gear up for the war effort. I mean, the 30s were kind of a tumultuous time. Obviously we had, our excuse me. Obviously we had the big crash that ended with a depression. So people were looking for other ways, farm equipment, airplanes, automotives, whatever was
industrial
around,
stuff,
right?
basically. Yeah.
So those guys, the manufacturing just ramped more up. I mean, we had more steel happening that time, more needs for that kind of stuff. So pretty much the war effort brought in new technologies, though.
Yeah.
So now we're kind of getting away from the older, like, labor-intense lacing of wheels or having to, install all the spokes and true.
Yeah, you can actually do well. And then stamping had come out,
right.
but was still not as utilized as then obviously World War II. I mean that stamping of everything,
right.
and riveting things on together.
And some of the cars were changing over to the late model or modern wheels that we know of, where it had like a basically, like you mentioned, a stamp center, and then they had an outside hoop that they put the two pieces together. But those were on newer cars. This isn't something that, people weren't buying a brand new Plymouth and taking the wheels off and putting it on their jalopy. They're still doing wire wheels, but the technologies were coming out. We started to get, obviously from the war effort with aircraft, we needed lightweight wheels for aircraft, right? So you're starting to see metals used like magnesium, aluminum, even different blends of the two, but anything that was like an alloy metal was something that they benchmark to say, look, make this for aircraft.
Yeah.
So that technology brought out not just a lot of information about it, but it exposed people to a lot of stuff, because those GIs that went to war and they're working on an airplane, maybe a mechanic's working on an airplane, but he's looking at that landing gear and going like, hey, that'd be great on my hot rod at home. Or when he came home and remembered, oh, wow, I know how to cast, or I saw some guy cast this. So that kind of craze all of a sudden ramped really fast after the war.
Well, and that's, hot rodding in general, all really got its birth right after World War II, and because of a lot of the technology and exposure,
right.
For that. And I'm sure too, you're talking about the Borrani,
right?
See, now I'm
I got
doing
you doing it, right?
It's contagious.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you have GIs that are stationed in,
England
and in Italy, and stuff like that, they're going to be exposed to all those sports cars,
right?
And that style a little bit, that then they'll adapt that to their hot rod, back home.
Yeah.
So the Jaguar E-Type wire wheel is still a very popular style for a traditional hot rod.
Right. Or like you mentioned too, another manufacturer is Aston Martin, that you wouldn't think they'd have Italian wheels on a British car, but right place, right time.
Mm-hmm.
And again too, Aston Martin really probably didn't have maybe the patent to do something like that, nor the facility to even build them at. So it just made more sense to have them, built by somebody else. Thank God for the aftermarket, right? Mm-hmm. So from there, I mean, you got to look though, post-war again, let's get back into magnesium and aluminum castings, because that went from small time castings to guys that form businesses. Now, one that's going to stand out the most to a lot of people have heard this name before, but Halibrand, which was a company actually before the war, even into the 20s, I believe. And he manufactured wheels again for aircraft and automotive use.
Yeah. And this is Ted Halibrand is the name behind Halibrand.
Right.
If you will.
And he was a midget racer. Midget car, not a person. That's a shout out to Brett.
Yeah.
But again, midget car racer.
Yeah.
That noticed also the same thing. Hey, how do I get an advantage over my other guy?
Well, and that's lighter weight, lighter, rotating mass.
Exactly.
For all of these things. Maybe a smaller wheel with less rotating,
unsprung weight.
Unsprung weight.
Unsprung weight. You're trying to get rid of unsprung weight. So that was the idea, is that how do I get this force off of me and make the thing basically rotate faster? So he actually worked, like I mentioned, with both magnesium and aluminum. In his early days, magnesium was kind of the way to go, because obviously it was the lighter of the two.
Yeah.
And however, it's difficult to cast. It has its temperaments.
I also know from personal experience that it's also very flammable.
It doesn't like to go out. It takes a while to get it started, but it doesn't like to go out. Yeah. So that was, and again, too, they didn't really think of that. They were thinking more of, hey, can I make this thing and not break? Because what happens with magnesium a lot of times is that the two metals or the two components don't really form that much, and you'll have air pockets, and basically the wheel gets...
You'll have a weak point.
You'll have a weak point, right? Yeah. The other thing, too, is magnesium, it doesn't stay very well. It's not good to elements. So... you leave a magnesium wheel outside, it's going to dull overnight. Because just the atmospheric air is going to
it's going to oxidize.
It's going to oxidize the wheel
much more quickly.
So it was more of a racing application, or like I mentioned, more of an aircraft situation, because those were the cars or vehicles that were taken care of a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
weren't worried about the longevity of something, but they needed the strength and the lightweight application for it. But that just back to, especially with Halibrand, people talk or use the term mag wheel or mag style wheel.
Right.
And that's all coming from this because of the magnesium,
That's absolutely correct.
Surprised we didn't get an alu wheel
or
right? Something like, for the aluminum style wheels. But
well, that's what they call the alloy metals,
Well, yeah, because you got a blend of all of them. And he used the knockoff as well especially for the racing application. And then that, I don't know if it's directly from just in general of all the guys realizing, better materials, better, technologies, but like the IndyCar racers adopted a lot of these mag wheels versus the wires that they had been running on for decades.
And that was a direct thing from the midgets. Because obviously, open wheel racing, you start in midgets and you work your way up to Indy cars.
Yeah, so the guys that were
they saw
were crossing
what was
over
going on.
in them. Yeah,
and that's kind of funny that you bring that up too, because the last Indianapolis race won on a set of wire wheels was in 1948, and it was on a set of Daytons. And from 49 to the 70s, Halibrands.
Okay. And then now, since then, it's all probably just custom wheels that they. For Indy,
Indy had. Honestly, OZ was a major manufacturer.
Yeah.
They come out in the 70s, that kind of stuff, and they did a lot of F1 stuff. So the Indy guys, they went over to the OZs, stuff like that. But there was also, a lot of teams did make their own wheels, casted their own wheels.
Yeah.
There was other teams like
once you get to that level of
that's,
things, it's kind of
more the 60s. That we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
But for the major part, for the 50s and 60s, though, Halibrand was the wheel to have for Indy racing, and they basically won every Indy 500 since then.
Yeah. And that's
time.
and so obviously that's circle track, if you will, or race track kind of style. But the land speed, we had that going. The hot rod, dry lake bed, that kind of stuff. They're obviously trying to emulate a lot of the higher end race car guys in the very beginning for hot rodding. So they're adopting this kind of wheels as well, instead of the, Dayton's or the spoke wheels from overseas.
And also too, tire technology was changing. So even your land speed guys, well, let's back up this too. Halibrand themselves didn't make just wheels. They also made center sections and full-on quick-change rear ends. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the land speed guys relied on the size of wheel to change their gear ratio. Well, Ted's like, hey, why don't I just make a quick-change rear end where you could literally unbolt the gears and switch them around, and you can change it right there at the track.
Yeah.
So that was a huge difference that really kind of catapulted, the use of not just his wheels, but also of his rear differential, rear axle. So that helped out a lot too. But, now they weren't the only game in downtown as well. And they weren't the only style, because mag wheels, they were expensive. They weren't cheap. They, wire wheels were still the old technology. So it was real easy to get an older, wire wheel. But how do you make that wire wheel to today's standard, or at the time, that standard of the day?
Yeah.
Well, there's a guy named Dean Moon. And Dean Moon, again, too, World War II aircraft, he sees
spun aluminum
hub covers, right, that are on airplanes. And again, too, that's pretty slick looking. And the wind kind of cuts right through it.
Yeah, you're reducing the wind resistance in the air. Yeah,
and he wasn't the first. I'm not gonna, I don't want.
No, because even we look back at and I was gonna bring this up talking about the tires with the land speed stuff, especially the tire technology back then when they're going 100 miles an hour. And, there's guys that have been killed in an accident because a seashell pierced the tire.
Right.
But they were covering the hubs. They were doing skirts. Obviously cars have had the skirts and stuff to try to make it more aerodynamic.
Right.
But yeah, the moon eyes, the moon disc, really came popular for all the Bonneville and Dry Lake stuff.
And again, well, not just that. That's what was so great about these, is that Dean looked at this, and Dean was getting into all kinds of stuff at this time. I mean, he wasn't just, because there's like, Alec Exitius, you look at him and he was more of a Dry Lakes guy
at that time. He was SoCal Speed Shop at the time. Yeah.
And he didn't really get into drag racing yet, but he was, going that direction. Well, so was Dean. Dean was looking at this as, hey, we're out here at, Mirac or
El Mirage or something. Yeah.
But also, too, they might be going to Santa Ana drags. So at the time, Southern California had that kind of mix of different types of racing.
Yeah, it was just what was happening that weekend or that night.
Right.
And, when you can make it out.
And the cool thing about the moon disc is that a moon disc could be on a Dry Lakes car, it could be on a drag car, or it could be on your custom.
Yeah.
So that's what kind of all of a sudden turned into this like phenomenon of, hey, I got to have cool wheels on my car. If you're the guy that was driving around the 36 Ford but had a pair of moon disc on it and going to high school in 1954, dude, you were the cool guy.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. All the racing technology and hot rodding kind of transferred on to just as a style,
right?
Overall from that. And you mentioned like a newer car. Obviously we talked about 1940 Ford, kind of standardized their lug pattern,
right?
If you, didn't actually look up when the 5-on-5 came into play, but maybe
no, mid 30s.
So
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
so yeah, around so. The passenger car wheels, were just your stamped steel kind of style wheels with then a hubcap and a trim ring to fancy it up.
Exactly.
If you will.
And it's funny how they tried to emulate the older wheels. Like you mentioned, the trim ring around a stamped steel wheel, the hubcap that made it look more chrome.
Yeah.
That, it gave the appearance of like, I have a upgraded wheel. But when you peel all that stuff back, it's just your utilitarian.
Yeah, it's like a, Toyota Corolla, from the 90s with 4 spare tire style looking wheels with some plastic hubcaps to make them look like a 5-spoke or something like that.
Right. And
but a lot of the hot rod guys started to see that they could, we're talking now 20 years later or 15 years later, they can pull off, or they're taking the factory wheel maybe that was on their car,
right,
and changing the offset.
Well, here we go.
Or widening the hoop on it to fit a fatter tire,
right?
On it for racing or for just looks and style.
Think of the time as well. We're after the war. We're kind of getting off the dirt and going onto the asphalt because coming home, everybody's building on, especially in Southern California.
Racetracks, also freeways are
just
going to start to be city streets.
Asphalt laid, brand new streets. I mean, think about it now. If you drove a brand new street in your neighborhood, I mean, like, it was made yesterday.
Yeah.
It's going to be the smoothest, perfect deal. Well, they were,
doing that all over the place back in the 40s and 50s.
Right. So now all of a sudden your Excelsior Firestone dirt track tire is not going to give you the traction you want on asphalt.
Yeah.
And also that skinny, tall tire that you have to worry about gearing. Well, now you're on this beautiful surface that will allow you to go much faster as long as you can get the horsepower to the tire.
And that's what you need the traction too on that. And that's going to come from a wider footprint and a wider tire.
So it's funny that you say the word traction. I love that you brought that up. That just, keyed that. Bing.
Yeah. I mean, but that's the thing is these guys are also putting, Cadillac, Lincoln 400 plus cubic inch motors into a, 1,500 pound little hot rod.
Exactly.
You're going to burn the tires up. So yeah, you need something to be able to hook them up to actually, race it.
So the fix for that was to take the center out of the stamped steel factory passenger car rim.
Yeah. Cut it out or machine it out probably.
Right. Some of them were even riveted in. So you would drill out the rivets and basically you would take the center out, leave the hoop the same, and you would turn it around so the offset of the wheel would change.
Yeah. And that was like kind of because they were like a little bit convex or concave, so you'd flip that. And that is called reverse offset or reverse, wheel.
Well, here's the other reason why most people refer to them as reverse chrome offset. And I'll tell you the reason where chrome comes in, because they didn't do anything very pretty to the wheel. I mean,
you're cutting it and welding it back in. Yeah.
But in Southern California at the time, there were so many aerospace, and also with LAX expanding into a major airport, there was a whole flood of different chrome platers throughout the area. So chrome plating was actually very affordable.
Yeah, it was cheap and actually could be done in California as opposed to now is a little tougher.
You know, and also too, everybody wanted that Duesenberg look. They wanted that shiny chrome wheel look. So if you could change the way that your wheels looked and had them chromed and make your car look even cooler, that was the other thing. Is that style all of a sudden?
And that would stick the wheels out a little bit wider. You know, especially if you're on a high boy or you're taking the fenders off, so you can make a little bit wider of a stance and platform with.
Well, look at your classic Model A pickup. When you take the fenders off and make it a high boy, what's the first thing you do? You put cheater slicks on it. And that was that style that came out from that reverse chrome offset, cheater slick. You know, that was your deal. And I mentioned the word cheater slick. Here we go again with tires, right?
Well, and that's like you say, they got to go together at some point.
So there was a company called Inglewood Tire that was
in Inglewood,
California. Yeah. And they were known for doing reverse chrome offset wheels. That was very popular. But they were also a tire manufacturer. So they were actually the first guys that they heard. Well, I can't say that because really the first cheater slick is Alex Xydias. Back in, I want to say 53, he was the first guy to cap a tire and put more retread over a standard tire to get, you know, a fatter deal. Because he knew it wasn't about, he didn't understand the compounds yet. He just knew that you're going to burn the tire. So the fatter the tire,
so
the taller,
just adding more,
you're just adding more
material basically
and
to the tire.
And as you heat up the tire, it got sticky, right? But they didn't understand compounds. They didn't, you know, like.
I mean, they probably maybe them, but there was some that did because we're also talking about the early, you know, years of plastic manufacturing and injection molding, like all the technology that came out. So yeah, there was probably some dude at least at some point that understood the compound technology there.
Exactly. And the person that knew the most about it was the guys at Inglewood Tire. And that's what they came out with a tire called Pause A Traction because it was positive traction, right? So, and that name state, I mean, again, too, I know a lot of people heard of positive traction tires, you know, because that even through the 70s with Krager's, that was a big deal to have a positive traction tire with a Krager wheel. But this was like the birth of that. Yeah. And at the time, Inglewood was a farming community. You know, we think of it as SoFi Stadium now, but at the time,
it essentially that time it was outskirts of LA. It was the countryside more of around, you know, Los Angeles.
So they took a tractor tire, literally a tractor tire, and they carved that tire down, and it had this weird kind of like waffle or like what they called a pie crust style to it. So that's where you get the name pie crust slicks from. Is that they look like, you know, it
had that kind of that.
And they would cap over the tire, and they would shave down the big, like, think of like tractor tires with that big
shave
giant
down the
knobby.
knobs.
Right.
Yeah.
You'd shave that down, then you would cap the tire over, and that was your slick, right? And they performed that. I mean, Alex was the one that told people, go to Inglewood Tire. And they performed that as a one-off deal. It wasn't until M&H, which is another tire company, is that M&H actually made purpose-built slick tires. Yeah. And that was the whole thing. It was for drag racing only. They had no tread on it, so obviously that's why they were called slicks. And they actually started manufacturing those.
Yeah, in the late 50s.
Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. So, but that was kind of the birth. And again, too, it went back to now there's a tire that matches the wheel that now matches the car.
You mentioned M&H Tire and as a purpose-built tire for drag racing. You know, they're not taking something necessarily that was like Inglewood Tire was, where they were, you know, taking something that had another application, modifying it for their use. Right. You know, same as like a lot of the wheel companies. Yeah, the wire wheels had been around. It wasn't specifically made for racing. Right. You know, but yeah, we got the Halibrands, actually casting things that racing guys were using. Well, we started to actually get companies that were making race specific, hot rods, speed shop specific, you know, wheels and tires, that would then basically kind of launch the whole industry. I mean, obviously the first one that comes to mind is American Racing. Obviously. But, you know, you've got multitude of other companies that are either some still around, some that, you know, merged or, you know, were only kind of around for a few years. But I think in the next one, we'll kind of dive into those purpose-built wheel companies, especially with, you know, all the drag racing that started to come out, but also like the custom cars, the hot rods, like what was popular, you know, like on an early custom, you could pop a set of Kragers on there, you know, or your other alternative was like a Cadillac hubcap.
Yeah.
You know, on a set of white walls or something like that. So
50 Buicks came with wire wheels, and they were manufactured by Kelsey-Hayes.
yeah.
You know, so even the OEM guys looked at the style. You know, it wasn't just a hot rodder thing anymore. It was now about, hey, what car makes the right sense to have the right wheel on it?
Yeah, what looks like, and that's, Buick was kind of meant to be like your everyday family luxury car,
right?
You know, kind of, so like, oh, well, let's put some wire wheels on it, make it look fancy.
Right, exactly.
So,
and it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's, so the next episode, I think we're going to be diving into, you know, some of these early brands, the Kragers, the Astro, you know, ET, American Racing, Halibrand, obviously.
Chassis Research, those kind of guys.
Yeah. So all the very early, you know, race specific aftermarket wheel companies. And that's, I mean, like I said, we're first episode on the wheel history, and we've barely touched even aftermarket wheels.
Right.
Which makes sense. So, you know, we're going to be doing several more of these and definitely get into like the years of spinners and 20s, dubs, you know, all the crazy, you know, wheel styles. Maybe we'll even do an episode of like horrible wheel styles, because there's a lot of those.
Plenty of those, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but stay tuned and check it out. And if you want to go back and take a look at some of the hot rod things that we've referenced in this episode, go back and check out our series on the hot rod history and land speed history as well, because all of these tie together. It's all different parts of an overall race car hot rod custom. So stay tuned.
Sounds fun.